Your accessory lifts in your training program should hold a lot of weight. They are so important for so many reasons, and I want to break out why I believe they are and how to approach them. I often see so many people not put the intent, the effort, the execution into their accessory lifts, and it just leaves so much on the table. You should be looking to progress your lifts. They should be targeted towards specific areas, and they should be serving a purpose for your training program. Otherwise, they just turn into, extra junk volume that you end up throwing into a training program, or you just mince through them at the end of a training session and not really put much effort or attention to them. So when we're looking at accessory exercises, they play a pivotal role in the training process. Now, getting as much out of them is so important because they are going to supercharge whatever it is you're training towards. If you're training for strength, they're going to help support the bigger movements that you're doing. If you're training for hypertrophy, they're going to work on the smaller segmented muscles. If you're training from a rehab standpoint, you're building up areas, you need to build up stability, build up control post-injury. They're only going to assist you. So we need to look at them in a way where they're actually part of the main training program, not an additional add-on at the end of a training program. Now, the facility that I work at is a strength training facility. We're hugely dominant in that area, but you will see the lifters that excel and the lifters that get best results are the ones who are putting most of their effort into their accessories. They're pushing to the right RPE. They're really not leaving much on the table at the end of each session. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to do 15, 20 exercises per session. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying the exercises in your training program, when they're in there for a reason. Approach them in a way that means that you're actually getting the progress that you need out of them. That is the key to success for long-term progression. Now, what are they for? What do accessory lifts do, and how do they support? When you look at a training program in itself, generally speaking, the most important exercises first, and then there's a cascade down. And it's big movement, less big movement into smaller movements at the very, very end. Now, they are the accessory exercises. Now, if we're talking about squatting, for instance, I might have a squatting movement followed by a movement that either assists that movement or assists a weak point, and then I'll have some movements that bring up certain areas. So if we put a bit of a framework around that, it could be squat, low bar squat, it could be belt squat, followed by leg extension with some hamstring curls and some calf raises. That's a really logical way to look at a particular training program for a strength day. And all the exercises behind it are working smaller muscle groups that are assisting the big muscle group. So they may not directly carry over to the actual squat itself in terms of actual kilos on the bar, because you actually need to squat, but the muscle mass that you build, the tissue tolerance that you build, the variability and movement patterns that you create helps to really support everything as a whole. So they have a place in your training programs. Now, in terms of, say, rehab, when we look at accessory exercises, rehab and accessory are the same thing. If you approach your accessory exercises and they're planned out well, there can be periods where you're working on isolated muscle groups and you're building up all the small components. There's periods where you're working on unilateral base movements or making sure that you don't have as much difference from left to right. So you're working on any asymmetrical differences from left to right. So that could be seen in terms of a rear foot elevated split squat, a single arm dumbbell press, single arm rowing movements, and all different movements that fall into categories like that. Then when you're starting to get heavier or you're getting towards the back end of a voluminous training block, you may then add in, say, some machine-based, externally stabilized exercises, which means you can put more weight on, you can push harder towards your fail point, and you can really get and extract the actual hypertrophy that you're chasing out of the exercises. And then, say, for instance, you were peaking for strength, you may then have exercises which specifically target weak points of your main lifts. Now let's use squat again. Say I had a terrible upper back tension problem where I really struggled to maintain that posture needed into the actual barbell. I've got plenty of rowing in my program. I've got all the lat work, scap work. I can use accessory exercise work to really focus on bringing up the weak points. So a safety bar squat, something that really challenges my upper back. So you can use big bang for your buck exercises that work weak points as well. So when we start to look at accessories, they have such a varied purpose throughout your training program. But if you're really specific with it and you have a training program that's intelligent enough and progressive enough that actually accounts for it, you can have different phases focused on different things, which allows you to then build really robust people, reduce chances of injury, make them actually look like they lift. Like there's nothing worse than, spending so much time in the gym and you don't look like you have a skerrick of muscle mass on you. And then just from an enjoyment standpoint, I don't know many people that come to the gym and don't enjoy getting a nice pump at the end of a session. It's all well and dandy lifting heavy weights. It feels nice. It's constructive. It's a sport in itself if that's what you're competing in. But having some supporting muscle groups, which helps just do some sets and reps, push some blood to certain areas, actually feels very, very constructive. So accessory exercise, if I haven't sold you by now, they should be in your training program. Now, I think one of the big pitfalls that I see with them is people just don't treat accessory exercises as part of their training program. It's like an additional add-on. There is no additional add-on for accessory exercises. They are your program. And I think if we apply the same logic that we would apply to progressive training, we either need to be doing more sets, we either need to be doing more reps, or we need to be adding weight, or we need to be cleaning up technique or improving on the RPE week on week. It needs to be progressive in some sort of nature. Now, some exercises, let's just say a bicep curl. Yes, it's going to be very hard to continually to progress, say weight. Say you can do 20 kilos on a dumbbell and the next jump up is 22.5. Yes, granted, that may be very hard to make that 2.5 kilo jump. So you're going to have to use different techniques, which is going to allow you to progress. So you can add reps, you can add sets so that you get an accumulative volume change, which then hopefully the adaptation of that will allow you to then make the jump over time. So some exercises, there's going to be a limit on how far you can push them, but it doesn't mean that you just stay at the same weight and you don't make any progress. You still need to figure out strategies at which you can push things forward. Another common example of that is core training, for instance. If all you do is 60-second planks, you're leaving so much on the table there. There's anti-rotation, anti-extension. There's actually resisted stuff, the stuff in the frontal plane. There's so many variants that can challenge you in different ways and push progress forward. So, this same logic can be applied to every part of your training. If you've got poor shoulder mobility, you've got poor scapular control, you've got, glutes that are, constantly down-regulated, this is where your accessory exercises are a superpower. They can come in and they can really work on specific areas. But what I would say is with accessories, don't be in a hurry to change them. If you've put in, say for instance, you had a really weak posterior chain, back, upper back, lower back, glutes, hamstrings, calves. Don't expect that after one block, everything's going to be sorted. You need to spend an appreciable amount of time actually working these exercises. And variety is not what you need in most cases. It's progression. Progression on the exercises, whether it's weight, whether it's volume, actually ideally both over time. And the reality is the same as if you were training for powerlifting. You would squat, you would bench, and you would deadlift in some sort of variation year round for the most part. The same happens with accessory exercises. So just don't be in a hurry to actually change up exercises just because you think you've mastered it. You can always get more out of it. It's like a squat. If I hit a 1RM today, I don't just stop squatting because that's it. I've mastered the squat. You dial it back, you figure out a plan so you can keep pushing forward. You need to do the same with your accessories as well because they are literally the linchpin that holds the entirety of your body together. Strength, muscle mass, stability, rehab, control. They are so important for long-term progress, and I see them get minced over so often. So make sure that you're not sandbagging your accessories is what I'm getting at. Now, when we start to actually treat them like a main lift, they start to progress like a main lift. It's changing the way that you think about them, which is actually the most critical thing here, because the amount of times that I see them and they're just, there's exercises thrown into your training program that don't really do anything. I review a lot of training programs and they don't look like they're that supporting. Yes, I understand in those situations, you probably wouldn't put that much intent into them. But when they're actually targeted towards something that you need, something that is actually helping you, you need to put the effort into them. If you progress them the way that you should, you will honestly start to get so much out of them. Now, what I would say is, instead of having, so in your training program, say for instance, you have 5 exercises. Instead of going, well, I need to add more per session, more sets, more volume, what I would say is make sure that you get 2 really critical good sets in. If you can push 2 really, not including warm-ups, 2 really good appreciable sets in that push you really close to failure, you'll probably find that you enjoy your accessories a lot more, because you know, sometimes say your A and your B exercise, your first and second exercise, they can take a lot of energy from you. And then if you've got like 16 or 20 sets of accessory exercises combined at the end, you can kind of look at it and without even knowing, you kind of regulate your energy. You kind of slow down. You know you have so many sets in front of you. So what I would say is actually do less than what you think you need to, because I would much rather someone say, I did 2 really, really, really good sets, close to failure. I got what I needed out of it, rather than saying I did 4 average, mediocre sets any day of the week, because I know those 2 sets are going to count, where the 4 sets are, yeah, they're going to do some stuff, but you're kind of just going through the motions. So you need to make sure that when you're actually doing them, the environment, the training program, your energy, you're in a position that you can actually put the required effort into it. So another thing that I often see as well is there's just so much training volume in the main lifts that when people get to the end, they're absolutely exhausted. So if you're that person that's falling into that category, you may need to actually look at the way that you approach your training program, the training volume in itself. Like if you're doing 8 sets of 8 of bench press, you're probably not going to have much energy left to do chest flies and dumbbell press, because you've just done 8 sets in front of them. So it's also managing load across a training session and across a week that's really, really important. Now, you know, the premise of doing more is not necessarily better. Doing better is better. And that's something that, you know, as I've gotten further into my coaching and my practitioner sort of work, is quality always trumps the amount of work that you do. I would much rather someone sit on the lower end of volume, on the lower end of intensity, but doing it in a way that's super constructive, doing it in a way that allows them to win with technique and win weekly, each block, each year, because those small efforts of winning is going to far outweigh any hard and fast training volume, any hard and fast training intensity that you could ever do, hands down. So I think quality always trumps everything. Now, if you are one of the people that are sitting there going, mate, I train hard in my big lifts, honestly, do yourself a favor. Get stuck into your training accessories, treat them as main lifts, drop the volume in them if you need to in terms of overall sets, and progress them over time. Use them as a tool to progress you forward and push your training technique, build the muscle mass that you need to get better at the big lifts, provide stability, create more symmetry within your system, and help you progress. They are a superpower that should be used. So stop sandbagging your accessories, put some effort into them, and I guarantee the rest of your training gets better. That's it for me today. I'll see you guys on the next episode.